Warning: the following program may contain material not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
The borders of space and time have opened once again. And transmitting from the mountains of West Virginia, it's time once again for Let's Find Out with Diego. The universe is waiting for you.
All systems go.
On this episode of Let's Find Out, we're going to plunge into one of the most baffling cases in American history. In February of 1978, our guest vanished without a trace while on a cross-country skiing trip near Lake Michigan, only to shockingly reemerge 15 months later in Massachusetts, disoriented and with no memory of his missing time. Now, for decades, the story of his extraordinary disappearance has been an unsolved mystery fueling endless speculation. But now, after 45 years of silence, Stephen Kubacki is finally ready to reveal the truth. All this plus more. Please welcome our new friend and first-time guest, Stephen Kubacki. Stephen, my friend, welcome to Let's Find Out.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor. Thank you.
Oh, honors on this side of the table. Truthfully, we were having the conversation pre-interview, and I don't know if you watch much television. Back in the early 2000s, there was a commercial for a beer called Dos Equis, and they had this guy. He was a pretty badass, and they called the world's most interesting man.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, the world's most interesting man. Yeah, I remember that commercial. Yeah,
I'm gonna say the commercial is incorrect. You're the most interesting man in the world right now, my friend.
Well, it's that's very good. It's a lot of good flattery, so I can't say I don't like it. So
no, and it's perfect. It fits you perfectly because not only would it talk about your new book, of course, but there's so many things you've done ever since that first. What we're talking about, the disappearance, and then fast forward later, and then before that. So before I continue, because I can do this all night long, what was your life prior to this life-changing event that occurred near Lake Michigan? What was going on?
Okay,
around
well,
1978.
it's a very long story. It all kind of starts in childhood, but let's just move up to when I'm in college at Hope College. I'm 23. I'm in I think would be considered my senior year of college. And I was at a place where I felt a kind of a calling to do something different in the world, to what people would think is unimaginable, maybe impossible. I and a number of other people got together and we wanted to make the world a better place. We were, this is the late 1970s. The Vietnam War had ended, but there's still all kinds of wars going on in the world. There was still the threat of nuclear holocaust. Environmental destruction was happening. Of course, not anywhere near as bad as it is now. Authoritarianism was everywhere. Again, that seems to be rising now. So there were a lot of things going on. We felt the culture industry was very detrimental to people in general, kind of filling them up with sort of, I don't know, sensations and stuff to overcome the emptiness and meaninglessness. We just felt the world needed to be changed. We were we saw corporations, which are far worse now than they were back then, but they were slowly taking over the world, the governments. And we wanted to put a stop to that. We wanted everything to be democratized. We wanted there to be true meritocracy, true accountability. We didn't believe that people there were billionaires back there, but there were people who had a lot of money. We didn't feel that anyone was that great to deserve all that money, and that that income should be somehow distributed. And it was during the great, after World War II with Franklin Roosevelt, there was incredible distribution of wealth. That's what created the middle class. Before the Great Depression, there was no middle class. Didn't exist. It was because of World War II and Theodore Roosevelt. And there was a shift in wealth of about 30% to the middle class. The middle class owned about 40% of the wealth in the United States. Instead of before, 5% it'll to 95%. And now we're back there again. We're back. It's even worse now. We're back to where 5% or less own about 95% of the wealth of the world. It's unbelievable, and nobody is that great and, that genial to deserve all that. And what made our country great, after World War II. The GI Bill, et cetera, the interstates, all the things that were great that made this country wonderful is because, corporations were taxed at a higher level, and people who made lots of money were taxed higher. Anyways, those were some of the thinking that went on, and I'm just trying to connect it now to the present. But we got together. There was a few of us, and we decided that in order to change the world, that we would need to kind of have a bonding experience. And the decision was that I would disappear, that I would fake my death. And this was planned over a long period of time, where I always did a lot of kind of adventuresome things, climbing and yes, cross-country skiing. And, I was a young man. I was 23 and before that. And so are all the others. And it was kind of, I'm rambling a little bit, but it was a very unusual gathering of we'll say, smart young adults. That usually doesn't happen. And, alone, we probably would have, who knows how our lives would have gone. But together we felt we could do something. And so decided I would disappear. And so I cross-country skied out on Lake Michigan, which was not very far from Holland, Michigan, where Hope College is. And I skied out as far as I could. It was pretty far out. I planted my skis, left my backpack, and then I walked back. And I went to Mexico. And then I disappeared. That was the disappearance.
Wow. Now, we're going to definitely get into that here in a second.
Sure.
One would say there's a certain element of danger when a group of people get together to start I would say a revolution, contrary to what's going on in any country, especially against what the government's doing at its time. Were there any threats to your life or any of your partner's life during this time?
No, there's no threats to us. We just didn't want to be co-opted by the establishment and the system. And what we saw as our future was people either get co-opted and become part of the system. They become the very things, I've seen people, I'm a psychologist, I'm 71 down. And I've seen people, who start off with ideals and want to make the world a better place. And they turn out to be, over time to be exactly the opposite as they climb the corporate ladder or whatever the ladder is. They get corrupted. They become kind of narcissistic and more sociopathic. And so we didn't want to follow that. Now, there are people who, go out and try to change the world more reforming. We have some great politicians. We have a lot of great people trying to do good things in this country. There's no doubt that that's going on. But a lot of smart people then, get marginalized by going into academia. I didn't want to become an academic and get marginalized. That's a place where a lot of smart people or people who are kind of contrary to the system get stuck. You can write your books and do your journals and stuff like that. And then, then a lot of people, we see a lot of people just get crippled. A lot of people are crippled. I mean, we're all kind of cripples in lots of ways by the way we've been brought up in our culture. And so we decided we didn't want to follow that route. We wanted to get together and really change the world. And we wanted to start a revolution. I mean, let's use the right word. It was an attempt at revolution. We called ourselves the Nextalistic Revolutionary Front. That comes from the word nextalism comes from a book by A.E. Van Vogt, that's V-O-G-T, called The Voyage of the Space Beagle. A nextalist is a person who is able to understand the assumptions and methodologies across the hard and soft sciences, the humanities, and then by being able to not be tunnel vision by any particular scientific or non-scientific form of humanity, is able to then think outside the box and come up with creative, novel solutions that normally, it's kind of a little bit like a Renaissance person, you might say.
And are you still in touch with any of the members of your group from back then?
Yes, I am, to varying degrees. They're all still alive. They're all still living their lives. Their names have been changed in the book to protect their privacy. And also, when I reemerged, this is 15 months later. I'm jumping around a little bit, but 15 months later, when I reemerged, I feigned amnesia in order to protect my co-conspirators and, of course, myself. Because if I didn't, their lives would have been dramatically changed in some way. They probably might not have been able to do the things they wanted to do. And also, I didn't want my life to be defined by my disappearance, even though it's an important event in my life. And I still think the disappearance has a lot to say, to the world. I think especially young people who are struggling, especially men. I think it has a lot. I think it has to tell a lot to people who are feeling kind of estranged and meaningless and have a sense of resignation. And this is across all ages and people looking for some authenticity. And then all the rise of authoritarianism. Our book kind of gets into that. And my hope is this book is can be viewed as kind of it's a memoir, as a kind of a call to rise and take action by people, to believe in themselves and make a difference, and really kind of follow and believe in their ideals, the constructive and nonviolent ones.
And you mentioned now during the disappearance, Mexico.
Yeah.
Now, on the pre-screen, I didn't lie. I kind of might have made it accidentally flip my words. Now, I did slightly some investigation into that part.
Uh-huh.
I don't know what to believe about it or not. You can definitely correct me.
Sure.
You lived it. Were you training in martial arts in Mexico? Were you with some sort of revolution?
Yeah. Let me talk a little bit about the NRF, the Nextalistic Revolutionary Front. Again, it was me and my co-conspirators, and the organization was broken up into two parts. One was, you might call, the right arm, and that's where various members were going to amass power. One person in the area of politics, another person in money and finance, become a billionaire, and another person in religion, probably develop some new sect in Christianity. And that was the right. And then the left is what I was. I was to go underground and train in martial arts and try to develop a people's movement, around international people's movement around the world to change the world. And this would take decades to develop over time. And then at some point we would all get together, the right and the left. And the belief was, maybe a magical belief, I was 23 years old. Okay. Magical belief that we would all get together after these decades and we would pool our power and wealth and our everything together. And then we'd be unstoppable and we would change things. That was sort of that was the goal.
Well, in a way, kind of the goal kind of worked because in itself, some of you changed internally yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
While not necessarily not the whole world, but you basically worked on yourself physically and spiritually in a way, correct?
Yeah, I did. I tried to train in martial arts, and then I had a number of what you might call interdimensional experiences. I think of it as part of the multiverse. I know that's kind of popular now, but the multiverse, is probably the paradigm of existence that has the most support among physicists and probably most philosophers. There's lots of different theories about the multiverse. There's actually a multiverse of multiverse theories, okay, you might say. But in the multiverse, there are, kind of at least some physicists argue for an infinite number of universes and dimensions and U's. And as a sideline, I and a mathematician in another book that is on Amazon or other booksellers, it's called The Metamathematics of Existence. And we developed a mathematical theorem based on Gödel's ideas of consistency and inconsistency, that everything imaginable and unimaginable exists in some way, which is a support of the multiverse. But so I had these experiences, and I've had experiences like that before I disappeared growing up. But on the ice, um, I, it's kind of hard to explain, but in some ways, I kind of bifurcated. Like there was like two me's, you might say. There was kind of I left the ice. I changed my identity. I became Nathan T. Stanfield. That was my name after I left the ice and went down to Mexico. But another part of me entered some other kind of dimension, interdimensional experience, and I met these beings of light. And it was very interesting, kind of the communication through, I don't know, kind of odd colors, and I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain. And kind of communication through waves of light, and I don't know. Anyways, I gathered got information, things about that, and so there's a part of me that was kind of always there while Nathan was doing his thing. We kind of, it was kind of like being in two places at the same time. So that, and then later on, when I went to Mexico, I had some other kind of experiences. And when people I was working with in training the martial arts were brujos. I didn't know that to begin with, and they were kind of involved in all kinds of shamanism, and you might say sorcery, maybe for some good, but also for some bad. I felt that I had these dreams that they were like, somehow they were like taking energy from me. And I discovered they were trying to take energy from there's many of us in many different universes and many realities and timelines. And they were trying to take my energy, and they wanted me to become part of their organization. And I didn't want to do that. And I had an experience with a power, a force in somewhere in the multiverse. I called it Jaguar. It looked like a jaguar. And a classical shamanism, that might be seen as a power animal. And I had this experience, and Jaguar, I became the Jaguar. It was very, very intense. And I learned then that it was time for me to go, because these people were pretty dangerous and would, if I didn't stay, would cause me harm. So, I don't know, just kind of rattling here a little, but one of the problems with experiences in these other dimensions, or in the multiverse, is that we all take who we are. We all take our thinking, our previous personal history, our cultural values, all the things we know, and we have to make sense of something that's kind of fairly incomprehensible, very difficult to understand. And so this is why people might experience a power animal. Another person might experience it as an angel. Somebody might experience it as, I don't know what, some kind of force. But we all have different experiences of these things, because we have to create a structure. We have to make sense of it. And so I try not to take my experiences literally. I experience becoming and being with this being called Jaguar. But, that's an interpretation.
Right, as you mentioned, it helps us make sense of what's going on. It's good to have a structure in order to follow properly the message they might be trying to convey to you.
Yeah.
Now, with these experiences, with light beings, multi dimensions,
Uh-huh.
another you out there, would this fall mostly on a supernatural, or more of a maybe extraterrestrial?
Well, that's a good question. I'm an advocate of the multiverse. I think the supernatural. I'm against superstition. I'm very pro science. I think religions and all spiritualities should accept science and not think the world was created in 6 days or something like that. I mean, that we need to move spirituality to a more modern time, and I think the multiverse can be an umbrella for all forms of spirituality. When you think about it, if everything imaginable exists in some way, then there probably is some place where there is a Christian heaven or a Buddhist nirvana or things like that. But that would all fit under the multiverse. So I try, I try to find a way to kind of unify things, and so things are more understandable, but not entering the world of superstition. So I guess in a roundabout way, I don't really, the supernatural is just an old kind of way of talking about things. And I think, it's time that we, move forward and look at things in a kind of broader scientific way if we can.
And now, which brings us to today, in
Uh-huh.
the present. In between those experiences that you've had, because we're talking 45 years ago, within
Yeah.
45 years,
Uh-huh.
have you had any more experiences since then?
Yes, I have had experiences since then. Um, I did a lot of training afterwards. Actually, I became a professor and I became a clinical psychologist so I could continue to serve. It sounds a little odd, but my life's always been about serving others, and the disappearance was about serving. Yeah, there was something obviously about me with it too, and I became a psychologist so I could understand the micro world because the disappearance was focused on the macro world, on larger political, economic, cultural issues. And after I reemerged, I realized I really hadn't attended to the micro issues, the psychology, what makes me work, what motivated me about the disappearance. There was clearly a lot of idealism, a lot of hope, but, there's a lot of rage too. There's a lot of anger in my past. I hope I'm not being digressive, but I grew up in a lower middle class family. My father had an 8th grade education. My mother eventually worked as an administrative assistant at a university. I was 13. I was working in tobacco fields in the summer to buy clothes so I could go to a prep school, one of the most prestigious prep schools in the country, Deerfield Academy, so I could buy a suit and all the things you needed to do. But I was working, over 100-degree heat. And I worked in factories all my teenage life, in pickle factories, bicycle factories. My father worked in the tire factory. So I come from a very proletariat background. When I was at Deerfield Academy, which is a highly prestigious school, I was surrounded by incredibly wealthy people, incredibly wealthy. What did they do for summers? They went to Switzerland and went to camp or did this or did that. I worked. That's what I had to do. So, do I have a little, some envy about all that? True, I do. And I probably still do to some sense because it seemed inherently unfair. To the rest, where I knew most of the people I knew were never able to, accomplish that. I can't start my career off with millions of dollars behind me and inheritance and connections, etc. And so, when I applied to college, this is a funny story. When I applied, because I went to this prestigious prep school, you're supposed to, go to Harvard or Yale or, all these sort of places, right? Well, I was sick of the whole thing. I was actually almost thrown out of Deerfield Academy a couple of times, but I was sick of the whole thing. And I found I was walking through the admissions building. I found this piece of paper it was an admission application for Hope College. It was only a few pages long, like 2 pages or something. And I just wanted to know why I wanted to go. They didn't want know my favorite color and what books I read. And, they, like the other applications were like, tomes or like 10, 20 pages. I think it was their business. And so, yeah, I went to Hope College instead of going the typical Ivy League route.
But in a way, you got your education on a higher power in a way. Not discounting college or everybody else's experiences, but I think you got something extraordinary that happened in your life. Now, with these experiences, because we were talking, you're a hard worker as a young age. You went to college. You're trying to change the world. You have a lot going on. You're only 23 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward, well, just after the disappearance into now, did you develop any special types of abilities that you didn't have before? Something that you didn't learn here, in our plane of existence, in a way.
Well, I think in working with other, again, beings, extraterrestrials, however you want to talk about them, in other dimensions, which of course, if we, in the modern sort of theory in physics is quantum theory, quantum mechanics. And in quantum mechanics, the equations argue for an infinite number of universes. So, if there's all these universes and dimensions, there are probably beings or forces. I mean, there's a lot of popular movies like Interstellar, that talk about these beings, and so I think these do exist, and I think we can connect with them. I think what I've learned since my disappearance was I've studied more into quantum and became much more aware of something called quantum consciousness, where your mind can get into a particular state where you're able to access the multiverse. And what you do this through meditation, through quieting the mind in various ways, which then separates you from established thinking and all the chatter in your head. And so enables you to enter this sort of state of what we call quantum coherence, which opens you to the infinite possibilities or the multiverse. And I think that's what people do when they're having spiritual experiences or religious ones, or having visions, or entering these other worlds and contacting other beings. So yes, I've kind of worked on that. The problem also is that our world is not a fantasy novel. Okay, we don't have witches flying around and angels appearing on every corner and pigs flying. Ours is, there's a lot of rules and limitations in our universe. Okay, and they can be bent, and to some degree broken perhaps, but we don't live in a fantasy novel. And so a lot that goes on in the multiverse, if you enter any of these universes or dimensions, stays there. Okay, you can take back some knowledge, and clearly it might affect you psychologically, and sometimes maybe miracles occur. People get cured of cancer or whatever, who knows. Again, I'm not, and maybe there are some ways in which they enter our universe which we don't understand, but in general, not, in quantum theory, everything is in a sense possible, but the limitations of any universe limits that possibility.
Well, with these outside forces being able to enter into, I'll say, into our universe, and I'm referencing the experiences that you had and what you've seen, can science, or I'll say scientists, and those in more of a supernatural world, because my understanding, depending on who you talk to,
Sure.
because you have some scientists that do believe in certain spiritual things. Some say they're atheists. If you can't measure it, you can't see it, you can't weigh it, it doesn't exist. Can science and the supernatural kind of live in harmony somehow?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that was it. I was kind of,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think so. I think science is, you look at the ancient religions, they were based on the science of the time, on the knowledge of the time. Okay. And some of these, the science of the time, especially if you look at things like prayer and meditation and visualization, there's some pretty incredible, hypothesis testing that went on over centuries to develop these techniques we call meditation and prayer and visualization and journeying, that people can do to access these other universes and other dimensions. And so the issue is, not the issue is how do we interpret these things, and I think science can possibly give us, the multiverse can create a holding place for all these beliefs to occur, because there is some place in the multiverse, if it's infinite universes and dimensions, that there probably is something like a heaven or something like that, or gods, or again, there's lots of different, I don't think the problem is when religion, especially traditional religion, begins to dictate to science what is fact and not fact. That's the problem. That's when you get into superstition. And I think that's, we need to modernize a spiritual. And again, there's a lot of, Christianity, there's all kinds of forms of Christianity and Buddhism, etc.,
Right.
that are, that are based on faith and experiences in these other worlds, but not necessarily ascribe to any of the literal things that may have been said in ancient books.
Well, in touching with the ancient books, ancient religions,
Uh-huh.
ancient practices, in your opinion, my friend, when it comes down to the ones that were the closest to spirituality, or let's say, discovering other universes or being in contact with spirit beings, who do you think would easily be the closest? Was it the Egyptians? Was it the Greeks? Was it the Norse? Which one, in your opinion, got it almost right?
Well, I think that's what I was trying to say before, is I don't think anybody has it right. I don't think there is any truth with a capital T. I think these are all interpretations based on people's culture and personalities and historical circumstances, and just a whole variety of things. So I don't think anyone's got it right. I think it's like looking at, I don't know, maybe this is a little far, I don't know, like looking at a painting, and people have different interpretations of a painting. And in science, people have, physicists has different interpretations of the multiverse. They get into arguments and discussions, of course, because that's how you evolve things, but I think when we're dealing with the multiverse, it's very hard to, make sense of it so much, because it is so wrapped up with our subjectivities, with our personal stuff.
It taking the totality of
Uh-huh.
your life's work and experiences. We're here 45 years later. You chose to remain silent for that long. So, what finally compelled you to write the memoir? And on the second part of that question, what was the reaction to those closest to you once you revealed all these facts, all these experiences?
Yeah. Let me answer that last question first. When I disappeared, I had tremendous nightmares. I felt tremendous guilt. I felt I was on a mission that was more important than my feelings or the feelings of my family. I regret that. I caused a lot of suffering. My mother didn't believe I died, and she relentlessly tried to find me. She wrote all kinds of letters. Some of those letters are in the book. Actually, the book is interesting because there's all kinds of documents that I wrote, political, economic, some kind of poetic, some, I don't know, all various kind of interesting insights, and also by my co-conspirators. They're in there, which I think, makes it a kind of a different kind of memoir. But the letters from my mom, she hired a detective. So yeah, I mean, yeah, when I reemerged, I was quickly loved and accepted. They were just happy to have me back. I think, I don't know who believed my amnesia story. Some did, some didn't. But, when I finally owned up to it, people seemed to be okay. They were kind of angry about, I had some siblings who were a little angry about what I did. Of course, because I put them through hell in a certain way. And so, and I think that was one of the problems of the disappearance of the Nexialistic Revolutionary Front. It was based on secrecy, and I've come to learn that secrecy in the long run only creates more problems, and actually undermines the very things you want to do. So yeah, there's all, and we're facing that now, all kinds of secrecy in the government, and what goes on economically in corporations, and the secrecy really is harmful. So that was one thing that was, and then also the lack of transparency. We need to be fully transparent, and I think nonviolence is the way. Nonviolence is clearly the way to change things. I think violence is usually it doesn't. I mean, unless you're facing something that's horrible, like a Hitler or something like that. Yeah,
Right.
You need to do what you need to do.
And now on the first part of that, so 45 years later, why now? And of course, I'm going to add something else to it. Who was the first person you told?
The first person I told, let me see. I think it was probably a cousin of mine that I told about what really happened. Yeah, I think. And then I had a girlfriend. I told my girlfriend. I had some girlfriends. I told them, of course. And a few other people. Actually, over time, as a clinical psychologist, I do therapy. Some of my clients have discovered about my disappearance, and we've talked about it. It's never been an issue. No one's ever stopped therapy because of it. They actually thought, well, God, this guy's done all this crazy shit. Maybe he actually knows something that could be helpful to me, kind of in a funny way. So yeah, some people were pretty accepting. Yeah, and why now? I think I'm 71. I wanted to get the truth out. That's very important. But also because I don't know, it just feels like I think it can be helpful to people, helpful to young people, like I said, helpful to people wanting to find meaning. It's a call to action. Yeah, maybe it's not the right action, but it's like we need to do something. And I think what's interesting about the disappearance is that we were a community, and you can't change things unless you're a part of a community. And our society over the time is trying to turn us all into extreme individualists. Me first, and this way we don't trust one another. And because we don't trust one another, the powers that be, whether corporate or political or whatever, can do whatever they want. They can pick us off whenever they want. My father, he was an tire factory. He went on a number of different strikes. Did he do it for himself? No, he did it for the future workers, for other people. Did he lose a lot of money by doing that? Yeah, he did. He probably could never have made it up. But it was a sense of altruism and trust between people that can change things. I mean, you look at all the stuff going on. I have clients from Microsoft and Amazon all over, in Seattle, and it's amazing that people don't get together and unionize or do something or say, heck, let's just form our own company and get out of here. It's astonishing. But it's this philosophy, this cultural belief that we are all extreme individuals and we are all selfish. That's completely untrue. All the literature in psychology, anthropology, and sociology argue that we are social creatures, and we survive because we are social creatures. And yes, individuality is important. We need a balance between the two. And the thing, I mean, we ran a little bit here, but economics, modern economics, is based on the belief that we are extreme individualists, selfish. That's what they call rationality, being selfish. Selfish, emotion selfish is connected to being rational. That's the foundation of modern economics. There's no place for altruism or caring for others. It's all about me, me, me. And of course, it's leading to the destruction of our planet and a lot of suffering in the world. Yeah, it's created a lot of good things too. I mean, who can, I have a nice house, et cetera, et cetera. So these are all good things. Sorry.
Yeah, and I know that's fine, because in my times when I grew up, things started slowly changing when they say, love yourself, put yourself first always.
Uh-huh.
But there's more than just self, because you have people around you that you love.
Yes.
There's strangers you can help. And then down the line, they can help others. I think we'll benefit more if we help each other more instead of being so self-serving. And I know that we're all selfish to a certain degree, but I think there's a limit to when it becomes kind of dangerous in a way.
Yeah, we need to self-express. It's very important. It's what makes us a successful species, is that individually we all can be creative and self-expressive in our own way, hopefully in a constructive way. But we're also a social creature, and as a social creature, how do you think, look at all the things that go on socially, education, being raised by parents. I mean, it just goes on and on. We are social creatures. And to ignore that or to make believe that doesn't exist, like in modern economics, is just completely absurd. And of course, then, not surprisingly, modern economics is that priesthood then serves the wealthy and the rich who are into this sort of extreme individualism, which becomes kind of a sociopathy and narcissism.
So the only term I can think is follow the money sometimes, and you'll get the answer.
Yeah, follow the money and you'll see what it's about. It's, the decadence and everything that's going on is just unbelievable.
It is. It's sad in a way, but I try to do my best. We all do, as best we can, of course. Now, up until now, and I know you probably have you read any of the old newspaper clippings or articles about your disappearance? And what kind of wild theories have you heard from others that you're like, no, this is not what happened? But have there been more entertaining theories or just way out there theories?
Yeah, more entertaining than perhaps what I wrote. Maybe. there's a whole thing about the Michigan Triangle. There's in where I disappeared. It's called the Michigan Triangle, and boats have disappeared and people have disappeared. And so there's this. It's a little like the Bermuda Triangle. So there's that theory. There's theories that I was abducted by UFOs. Again, I had interdimensional experiences, but I wouldn't call it an abduction by any means. Oh, and let me digress here a little bit, because a lot of, when we look in the past, let's say before modern technology, people had all kinds of multiverse experiences. They, saw angels or God or Jesus or Buddhas, and they had all kind, maybe they might see devils or hungry ghosts, and a whole variety of different things. And again, that was based, a lot of it is interpreted through culture. And now people generally don't have such a connection with sort of traditional spirituality. And if suddenly you have an experience in another dimension, how are you going to interpret if you have no background to make sense of it? Well, you're going to be scared. You're going to be paranoid. And so perhaps some of these experiences for people is an interdimensional one, like I'm saying, not being picked up by a UFO, but because of the fear, you begin to see these beings or whatever they are as reptiles out to get you and, do surgery on you and do all kinds of awful things. In traditional societies, tribal societies, it was not uncommon for people to work with these beings or forces, and for them to kind of do things to their bodies, to their, I don't know if you call it physical or spiritual body or something like that. And that could feel like surgery or something happening to you or things getting implanted in you. This is very typical in a lot of, when, angels bring things to people and they put it inside their body and, help them to be, more caring and loving, maybe a white energy or something. This is what goes on. So I think I'm not saying there aren't UFOs. A lot of studies suggest there are, but I'm also suggesting that a lot of experiences that occur may be getting sort of a little bit misinterpreted because of because we don't have a way of making sense of it. Now, are there perhaps bad aliens and bad forces out there? Of course, there's bad, we have all kinds of bad stuff on our planet, and in the multiverse and all these other universes, there's probably other things out there that are not very healthy. Actually, I just had not too long ago, I had a very interesting experience. I don't want to disclose too much about and maintain privacy, but I went to this sort of gathering of people to meet this person who was channeling some like a being or something of energy. And there's a lot of people there, and it's a little bit of not quite a somewhat a little bit of a worldwide organization. And I was just kind of curious about it. And when this being appeared, what I saw was kind of like a portal, this being coming in. It's kind of like channeling. But it seemed to me that this being was unfriendly and was not, in fact, the being that they thought it was. I thought it was very contemptuous, haughty, and I thought pretty negative, and into really into power, but sort of disguised in lots of ways. So, are there bad things out there? Yeah, probably. Yes, of course.
Yeah, you take your chances sometimes, but I think if you're well protected and you think about the situation, what you're getting yourself into, maybe something you may or may not want to get yourself involved with. Now,
yeah, that gets into a thing I call a lot of people work with the multiverse or with gods or other beings or things, kind of in a form what I call spiritual capitalism, and that is like, if you do this for me, I do that for you. So if you help me win the football game, then I'll do this. I'll pray 10 times a day to you, or I'll give you something. Anyways, it's like a trade-off. And I call it spiritual capitalism, and that pervades a lot of kind of what people do. You make sacrifices, you do this, so that's one way of connecting with these beings. Another way is just not wanting anything, but being there to serve and care for others. And if they give you a boon or something good happens, great, but not to want that, not to engage in this sort of trade-off. because that's, it can be trade off for good. There are people who do a lot of, I've met people who do incredible healings, but there also can be for bad what we think of as sorcery. Again, in that whole crazy world. And again, there's just so many different levels of looking at things. There's this multiverse or transcendental spiritual world, and then we can look at things psychologically. Well, yeah, what's going on psychologically, what's going on biologically, what's going on socially. And I think we need to look at it all kinds of different levels.
Right. And, before you barter with any spiritual being, it's called a Faustian bargain. You're taking your chances. The house always wins.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. No, it is. And again, it doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad bargain. I've met people who have gotten really into particular kinds of spiritualities, and they do a lot of good things, but they've had to pay for it, in some way.
Yes, we all do. And now, before we go, I have a couple more questions, and then one that kept popping in my mind as we're having this conversation.
Sure.
And I wrote it down here. Since your disappearance in 1978, have you gone back to Lake Michigan, and have you gone back to Massachusetts, to those locations?
Well, I'm originally from Massachusetts, so I've been there many, many times after. That's where I lived after I reemerged. I lived in South Deerfield, which is not far from my reemerge in Great Barrington. And yeah, I spent many years there. I grew up in Massachusetts. Okay, that's where I was born. So yeah, and I don't go back quite as often because my parents have passed away, but I do go back there to visit relatives and friends. You see, Michigan. Yeah, I've been back to Michigan a few times at Hope College. Actually, during my disappearance, I actually went back. Me and my conspirators, we met in Holland, Michigan for a brief time to sort of reassess what we were doing and what we were supposed to do. And it was shortly after that one of the members I was spending a lot of time with, we decided that I decided kind of fortuitously, I at this person's house, I picked up a book called Beau Guest, which is a famous book about the French Foreign Legion. And then it occurred to me that I should join the French Foreign Legion. So I did. I didn't join it officially in the sense of signing any papers, because once you do that, if you leave, they'll hunt you down to the ends of the earth, because you're basically you're AWOL. So anyways, I did experience some things in the French Foreign Legion, but then I decided to leave because I had a very kind of highly dissociative experience where I saw we were one evening in the mess hall in the evening, this person was dragged in, we were all called in, and the shit was beaten out of him, because this is somebody who had left when they weren't, try to escape, and nearly death. And I then had this vision of what would have happened if I stayed in the French Foreign Legion, and what would have happened if the Nextalistic Revolutionary Front was successful. And it's a long vision. It's in the book, but it's not such a great thing. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of, and it was that time. It was at that point that I decided, I was like, my life has been one, not since then to some degree, but I have this ability to kind of peer over the abyss, and, I was peering over this particular abyss of sociopathy, and I realized I couldn't become that kind of person. I couldn't do it. There was something about me, or maybe others helping me, or other energies or whatever, but I couldn't do it. That's in the book. There's a lot of stuff about that in the book. And so, yeah, I couldn't do it. And that was pretty much the end of the NRF after that, because once I couldn't carry out my mission, then everything else fell apart.
My friend, you're a lightning rod for extraordinary experiences in a lifetime. I think we just scratched the surface. And I think I'd love to have you come back on next year, because I know you have more in there, but I'm going to ask you the most important question of all.
Okay, sure.
It's not going to shock you, the question, though.
Okay.
For our friends and listeners of Let's Find Out, they want to learn more about you, where to get a copy of the book, and more about your experiences, where can they find out?
Okay, well, the easiest way is to go on, Barnes and Noble or Amazon. The book is there. The Disappearance, Conspiracy, Revolution, Revelation, ... It's there, very easy to get. It's on. I think you can get on Kindle and also hardback. The audiobook should be coming out someday, but we're having some problems with the contract. I don't know. Who knows what's going on with that? Anyways, so that should be coming. So you can go to the book sites. Also, you can go to my website, StephenKubacki.com. So it's Stephen with a V, Kubacki, Kubacki.com. And on there is about me and the disappearance, but also a lot on my other writings. I just finished a book called The Multiverse Guide to Humanity. And it's really about becoming citizens of the multiverse. How do we become citizens of the multiverse and move beyond our parochial, universe-centric, etc. way of thinking on this planet that is destroying it and us? So it kind of gets at kind of the multiverse and kind of what it is and how to apply it to guide us, to help us become better human beings and more happy and more joyful. So that's a book. And then another one I've worked on for a long time is kind of a new theory around economics and looking at it. It's called Planetary Economics and Governance for Earth, Moon, and Mars. So there's a few other books in there, some excerpts of things I'm working on that people might find interesting.
Oh, interesting indeed. Now I know I'm going to bring you back in 2026, my friend.
Well, thank you.
There's so much more to learn. Stephen, my friend, thank you for being on Let's Find Out. Let's stay in touch, and I'm definitely going to put the link to your website so they can find out more about you and your book on the show description. I'll see you in 2026.
Okay, thanks. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, my friend.
Copyright Diego the Podcaster. All content for Let's Find Out is the property of Diego the Podcaster and is served directly from our servers with no modification, redirects, or rehosting. All celebrity impersonators are paid performers. The impersonated celebrities do not endorse or promote any views or opinions expressed by our guests, Diego the Podcaster, or Let's Find Out. The information shared on Let's Find Out with Diego is provided on an as-is basis, with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness.